I never imagined that a simple phone call could change the rhythm of my life so completely. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those quiet days in which the house seemed bigger than de facto era. I was standing at the kitchen sink, finishing the last bit of lunch, when my son called. His voice came hesitant, almost embarrassed, and before he even asked, I already felt that something wasn't right. He told me that the owner of the house where he lived with his wife had asked for the property back. The rental contract had expired, and the landlord wasn't willing to renew it. They had only a few days to move out, and they hadn't yet found another place. Then he asked, carefully, como si tivesse medo da minha resposta, if they could stay with me, just for a while, until things settled. To be honest, I didn't even think twice. I told him yes before he finished explaining. The truth was that loneliness had been my silent companion for years. After my wife died, the house became too large for just one man. Every corner carried a memory. Every night carried an echo. So when my son asked to come, I felt something warm abrir espaço dentro of me. Uma sensação que eu não sentia havia muito tempo. I imagined the house filled again with voices, with footsteps, with life, maybe even with laughter. Maybe the silence would finally stop gritando. By the next weekend, they arrived with boxes, bags, and an air of exhaustion that only those carregando dias difíceis conhecem. I helped them bring everything inside, directing them to the spare room, trying to be useful, even though they did most of the work. Sheila, minha nora, agradecia por tudo a cada 5 minutos. She was polite, gentle, always calling me sir, even though I asked her several times to just call me by my name. I remember watching the two of them organizing the room, and for a moment, I felt lucky. Lucky to have them there. Lucky to feel part of their life again. Families drift without wanting to. That's just how time works. So having them close again felt like a second chance at something I didn't know I had missed so deeply. But the person who filled that house the fastest was Sheila. She moved around the place with a natural ease, as if she had lived there for years. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets, not out of imposition, but out of care, making sure everything was accessible, clean, practical. She insisted on helping with the household chores, saying it was the least she could do since I worked all day and only came home late. She cooked sometimes, cleaned sometimes, folded clothes, reorganized shelves, all without me pedir nada. And suddenly, after so many years vivendo sozinho, voltar para casa e encontrar luz na sala, cheiro de comida quente ou alguém perguntando como foi o meu dia, me fez sentir vivo de novo. Still, I knew better than to create fantasies. They weren't staying forever, they were just passing through. But sometimes, even what is temporary can soften a heart que já estava endurecido pelo tempo. For the first few days, the house felt like a home again. We had dinner together, talked about small things, watched TV until late at night. I watched them, my son talking about work, Sheila rindo baixinho quando ele dizia alguma besteira. I observed the natural harmony between them, though even then I sensed a shadow behind her smiles. Algo preso, algo silencioso. But I didn't ask. It wasn't my place, or at least, I believed it wasn't. One night, as I walked down the hallway to my room, I paused without querer. Their bedroom door was half open, and inside I could hear muffled voices, Sheila speaking low, my son answering colder than de costume. I stepped away quickly, not wanting to hear more. I told myself it was normal. Couples argue, couples get tired. I didn't want to imagine problems where maybe havia apenas cansaço. But the next morning, Sheila's eyes were levemente inchadas. She tried to hide it behind a smile, and I didn't insist. Mas dentro de mim, algo se mexeu. A small worry, maybe, or a feeling that something in that house, something that had nothing to do with me, was about to shift. Ainda assim, naquela primeira semana, a convivência foi tranquila. Better than tranquil. It was healing. I didn't feel alone anymore. I didn't feel like a ghost moving between empty rooms. They filled the house with a presence I had forgotten how much I needed. If I had known how everything would unfold later, if I had known the weight that would grow inside me, talvez eu tivesse dito não naquele primeiro telefonema. Mas naquele momento, tudo o que eu sentia era gratidão. And no matter what came after, I can't deny this truth. When they moved in, my life finally felt less empty. It was the following Saturday night when everything began to change. Though, at the time, I didn't understand the weight that moment would eventually carry. I had just gotten home from work. It was later than usual, close to 9:30, and I was exhausted in that way only a long week can drain a man. All I wanted was a shower, a simple meal, and maybe 10 minutes in front of the television before sleep claimed me. But the moment I stepped into the living room, every trace of fatigue vanished. There she was, Sheila, sitting on the far corner of the couch with her head buried deeply between her knees, shoulders trembling like a child trying to hide her crying from the world. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp near the wall, casting a warm but lonely glow over her. I froze. It took me a few seconds to even move. Sheila was always composed, always trying to show strength even when she didn't need to. But seeing her like that, completely desmoronada, struck something inside me. Maybe a protective instinct. Maybe something else I didn't fully recognize yet. I walked toward her slowly, careful not to startle her. "Sheila," I whispered, "what's wrong? Are you hurt?" She lifted her head, and the sight nearly broke me. Her eyes were swollen, red, shining with tears that hadn't even had time to fall. Her voice came between breaths, shaky, embarrassed. "We had a fight," she murmured, wiping her cheeks quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see me like this." "A fight?" I repeated softly. "You and my son?" She nodded, and a fresh wave of tears spilled from her eyes. "Sergio. He's been going out every weekend, coming home late, sometimes early morning. I don't know what he's doing out there. I don't know who he's with." I felt my chest tighten. I hadn't known. I had seen nothing. And suddenly I felt guilty for being blind. Sheila continued, her voice breaking. "I waited for him last weekend too. I stayed up. He came home smelling like a bar. He didn't care that I was awake. He didn't even look at me." She pressed her lips together, trembling. "I just feel invisible," she whispered. Invisible. That word cut through me like a blade. A woman as young, as gentle, as dedicata as Sheila, feeling invisible inside my own home. I didn't know whether to feel anger or sadness first. I sat beside her, not too close, just close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "Sheila," I said slowly, "I didn't know things were like this between you two." She shook her head. "It's been happening for months, even before we moved here. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to cause problems." Her honesty struck me. Her vulnerability, even more. I had seen my son act immaturely before, but never imagined it had reached this point. And despite everything, despite how deeply she was hurting, not one word of hers carried bitterness or cruelty. Only sadness. "Did he leave again tonight?" I asked. She nodded, lowering her eyes. "He said he needed to relax, that I worry too much, that I imagine things." She let out a shaky breath. "But how am I not supposed to worry? A married man doesn't leave his wife alone every weekend like that." Her statement hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't exaggerating. She was simply telling the painful truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen filled the silence. She sniffled, wiping her face once more, but her hands were trembling. I reached for a box of tissues on the small coffee table and gently handed it to her. She accepted it with a soft, "Thank you," barely audible. And then She said something that stayed echoing inside me long after that night. I feel like I'm disappearing inside this marriage. Those words, they haunted me. I could almost feel her loneliness, like a person sitting on the couch with us. Not a loneliness caused by being physically alone, but by being emotionally abandoned. I breathed deeply before saying what I knew I needed to say. Sheila, I'm going to talk to Sergio, not to scold him, not to pick sides, just to remind him of the man he's supposed to be, and the husband he promised to be. Her eyes lifted toward mine, and for the first time since I walked in, I saw a spark of relief. Not happiness, not comfort, just a small, fragile hope. Do you really think it will help? She whispered. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I have to try. She closed her eyes and nodded, tears still clinging to her lashes. I could see how deeply she loved my son, how desperately she wanted him to change. All she needed was to feel valued, noticed, loved, and for that brief moment, I felt a powerful, protective sadness toward her. She wasn't just my daughter-in-law, she was a human being, suffocata pelador. I stayed beside her until she calmed down, her breathing finally steady. When she stood up, she apologized again, and I assured her she had nothing to apologize for. But as she walked toward the hallway, wiping the last tears from her face, something stayed heavy inside me. A feeling I didn't fully understand yet. A feeling I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. Because that night, when I found her crying in my living room, something inside this house, and inside my chest, quietly shifted. I didn't sleep well after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sheila crying on the couch, her shoulders trembling, her voice breaking as she tried to hold herself together. I felt a weight inside me, a mix of responsibility and helplessness. I kept thinking, how did I not notice sooner? How could my son, raised inside this very home, act with such careless disregard for the woman who loved him? The next morning, I woke early, even though it was Sunday. The house was quiet. Sheila hadn't left the bedroom. My son was still asleep. I made coffee, sat at the table, and rehearsed a dozen different ways to begin the conversation I needed to have with him. None of them felt right. I didn't want to attack him, but I also couldn't pretend nothing was happening. He finally came into the kitchen late in the morning, rubbing his eyes, stretching, completely unaware of the storm waiting for him. He grabbed a cup of coffee and sat across from me, yawning. Long night? I asked, keeping my tone controlled. He shrugged. Not really. Just had a few beers with the guys. I could feel irritation rising in me, but I forced myself to breathe. Sergio, I began, choosing my words carefully. We need to talk. He frowned, already defensive. About what? About your wife, I said. About how she's been feeling, about these nights you've been going out. His expression changed instantly. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. She talked to you, didn't she? He muttered. She was crying, son, I said softly. I found her alone last night. She's hurting. He rolled his eyes in a way that pierced me. Dad, she exaggerates. I work all week. I have the right to go out with my friends on the weekend. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're leaving your wife alone every Saturday night, I insisted. That's not just going out, Sergio. That's abandoning her. He scoffed. You don't understand, Dad. I'm stressed. I need to clear my head. And what about her? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Doesn't she need you? Doesn't she deserve your attention? She feels invisible. He shifted uncomfortably, but didn't look at me. Dad, please. Sheila is dramatic. She always thinks the worst. Do you hear yourself? I asked quietly. Your wife is crying because she thinks she's losing you, and your answer is to call her dramatic? He sighed in irritation. I don't want to talk about this. Well, you need to talk about it, I insisted. You brought her into my home. That comes with responsibility. I don't want to watch your marriage fall apart under my roof. He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back. I'm not a child, he snapped. You don't need to lecture me. I felt something sting inside me, some mix of disappointment and helpless anger. I'm not lecturing you, I said, calmer now. I'm your father. I'm trying to help before things get worse. Sheila loves you, but she's suffering. You're hurting her, whether you mean to or not. He paused, halfway to turning away. For a brief second I thought I had reached him, but then he shook his head. She'll get over it, he said coldly. She always does. And with that, he walked out of the kitchen. I stayed there, staring at the empty chair across from me. My heart felt heavy. I wanted to believe he was just stressed, overwhelmed, confused, but the truth was clear. He didn't want to change. He didn't want to listen. And his refusal to see the pain he was causing made something in me ache deeply for Sheila. Later that afternoon, she emerged from the bedroom, her eyes still a bit red, but her expression composed, as if she had forced herself to gather strength. She apologized for the night before. Imagine that. She apologized to me, even though she was the one suffering. I wanted to reassure her, but I felt the weight of the failed conversation hanging over me. I talked to him, I said gently. Her eyes lifted with a flicker of hope. And? I hesitated. He heard me, but I don't know if it made a difference. She swallowed hard. I figured. And then, with a small, sad smile, she added, "Thank you for trying." It hurt to see how quickly she accepted disappointment, how accustomed she seemed to being let down. A woman that young shouldn't have carried such tiredness in her face. That evening, Sergio went out again. No argument, no guilt. He simply grabbed his keys, said he'd be back late, and left. Sheila didn't cry this time, but I saw the way her chest rose and fell with quiet frustration. She stayed in the bedroom for a while, then came out and sat in the living room, trying to distract herself with the TV. I sat with her, not too close, but close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. She didn't say it, but her silence told me everything. And there, inside my own home, I felt something I'd never expected to feel. My son's indifference and her loneliness, pulling me into the center of a storm I didn't yet know how to navigate. There are nights we never forget, not because something dramatic happened, but because something quiet inside us shifted forever. That night was one of them. It was the following weekend, another Saturday that should have looked like all the rest. I had come home late, tired, hungry, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. When I walked through the door, the house was dimly lit, and Sheila was alone in the living room, sitting on the couch with her hands resting on her lap. The emptiness beside her told me everything before I even had to ask. "He went out again?" I said softly. She just nodded. There was no anger in her expression, no tears this time, only a tired resignation, the kind people develop when they've cried more than their heart has capacity for. I took a shower, changed clothes, and when I came back, she had warmed a plate of dinner for me, as she always did. A small gesture, yes, but one that carried so much unspoken gratitude and loneliness that it moved me. We didn't speak much while I ate. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, familiar, shared. When I finished, I thanked her, took my plate to the sink, and settled on the couch to watch something mindless on TV. I expected her to retreat to the bedroom, or maybe call a friend, but instead she walked toward the living room slowly, almost hesitantly, and sat beside me. Not close, just near. For a while, we watched the movie like two people trying to escape reality. Every now and then, I heard her exhale shakily. Not exactly a sigh, not exactly a sob, something in between, and every time my heart tightened. Finally, I asked, almost whispering, "Are you okay?" That was all it took. Her shoulders trembled, her hand lifted instinctively to wipe her eyes, and the tears she had tried to hold back slipped out. She didn't speak. She just let the emotions spill the way a tired heart sometimes does when no one is demanding explanations. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't want to bother you. I feel so lonely." Hearing that, seeing it, did something inside me. There's a kind of loneliness that goes beyond being alone in a room. Hers was the kind that comes from being unwanted in the one place where love was supposed to live. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. Words felt small. Advice felt useless. So I simply sat there, letting her know I didn't mind her presence, her silence, her tears. And then something happened. Something so unexpected, so delicate, that even now I can still feel the weight of that moment. Without saying a word, Sheila slowly leaned sideways until her head gently rested on my lap. My entire body froze. Not out of discomfort, not exactly, but out of sheer surprise. It was such a tender gesture, such a vulnerable surrender, that I didn't know what to do with my hands, my breath, my thoughts. I looked down at her. Her eyes were closed, her lashes still wet, her expression soft but exhausted. She wasn't seeking anything inappropriate, only comfort, only warmth, only a place where she didn't feel abandoned. And that tore me open in places I didn't know were still fragile. I hesitated, my hand hovering uncertainly above her hair, unsure if it was right to touch her, unsure if doing nothing would feel even colder. But when her breathing trembled again, something inside me made the decision for me. Slowly, I placed my hand on her hair and stroked it gently. She exhaled, a long, shaky breath that felt like a weight finally loosening inside her chest. I felt her body relax, felt the tension draining from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, not opening her eyes. Those two words hit me deeper than they should have. I told myself it was paternal instinct, empathy, compassion. I told myself I was only trying to comfort my son's wife during a difficult moment. But as I felt her warmth against me, her quiet vulnerability, her trust, something else began stirring inside me, something I didn't want to name, something I wasn't prepared to face. I kept my hand on her hair, careful, gentle, terrified of crossing any line. But even in that caution, even in that restrained gesture, my heart beat harder than it had in years. After a few minutes, she lifted her head slowly, wiping her cheeks. When she looked at me, her gaze was soft, softer than I'd ever seen it, and full of a gratitude so deep it felt intimate. "You're such a good man," she whispered. "I wish he could see that." I didn't know how to respond. Her words struck me in a place I didn't expect, the place where longing and loneliness sleep, even in older hearts. I forced myself to smile, to stay steady, to keep my voice grounded. "You're just going through a difficult time. Things will get better." She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe that. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I was no longer just witnessing her pain. I was feeling it. And that was the first sign, quiet, subtle, dangerous, that the lines inside this house were beginning to blur. In the days that followed, something subtle but undeniable began to shift inside the house. Nothing outwardly inappropriate happened. No lines were crossed, no words spoken that could be misinterpreted. But still, something had changed, and it changed inside me first. It started with the smallest things, details so innocent on the surface that I almost convinced myself they meant nothing. Almost. Every morning, I would wake to the faint scent of her shampoo drifting through the hallway. It wasn't overwhelming, just a gentle hint of something floral and warm that lingered in the air after she'd taken her shower. Before all this, I never noticed scents like that. The house used to smell like cleaning products and old wood, but now it carried traces of the presence of a young woman who moved through it with quiet sadness. Then there was the way she spoke to me, always gentle, always attentive, as if she were trying to prove to herself that someone in the world still saw her. Sometimes she would ask about my day, even when I barely had the energy to answer. Other times, she'd leave a small plate of sliced fruit on the table before heading to work, with a note that simply read, "So you don't skip breakfast." Little gestures, small attentions, the kind a lonely heart notices even when it doesn't want to. But the hardest part, the part that made her presence impossible to ignore, was the way she looked at me. Not in a way that crossed boundaries, not in a way that was inappropriate, but with a kind of softness I hadn't seen directed at me since my wife was alive. A softness born from trust, from reliance, from emotional exhaustion. One evening, as I walked past the bathroom, the door was half open and I saw her reflection in the mirror. She was drying her hair with a towel, her shoulders slumped, her eyes tired. She didn't see me, and I stepped away instantly to avoid invading her privacy. But for the rest of the night, that image stayed with me. Not because of her beauty, but because she looked lost. Like someone searching for ground solid enough to stand on. And the truth I refused to face was this: I wanted to be that ground for her, even though I knew I had no right to want anything. The more my son distanced himself from her, the more I felt her gravitating toward me, not out of desire, but out of need. A need to feel heard, a need to feel safe, a need to feel visible. Some evenings, she would sit beside me on the couch, leaving just a few inches of space, as if she were afraid to impose, but still unable to face the silence of the bedroom alone. We would watch something on television, nothing special, nothing memorable, but I found myself paying more attention to her quiet breathing than to the screen. I hated myself for that, because every time I noticed something, her sadness, her gentleness, the slight tremble in her voice when she tried to pretend she was fine, I felt something stirring inside my chest, something dangerous, something I had buried a long time ago and never expected to feel again. Affection, attachment, longing. One night, while we were watching a movie, she turned to me unexpectedly and said, "Do you ever get tired of being alone?" The question cut through me like a blade. I answered honestly, "Yes, sometimes." She nodded slowly, like she already knew. "Me too," she whispered. She wasn't talking about physical loneliness. She meant the kind that comes from lying next to someone who doesn't see you anymore. I didn't know what to say. I didn't dare say anything. Because the truth was, being alone used to be something I had accepted. But now I wasn't sure. Not after she had brought a kind of warmth back into the house, into me, that I thought I'd buried with my wife. Still, the guilt was never far behind. Every time I felt something deeper than concern, something warmer than empathy, I recoiled from my own thoughts. I reminded myself who she was. I reminded myself of the lines that must never be crossed. But even boundaries as solid as steel begin to bend under the weight of proximity, tenderness, and repeated heartbreak. One afternoon, when I came home earlier than usual, I found her folding laundry alone in the living room. She looked up, surprised, but smiling softly. "You're home early." I nodded. "Finished work sooner than expected." She continued folding a shirt, my son's shirt, and for a moment her hands paused. "He didn't come home last night," she said, barely audible. "He didn't even call." I swallowed hard. "Sheila, I'm sorry," I said, feeling the words fall flat against the depth of her pain. She exhaled a shaky breath and looked up at me. "Sometimes I feel like I married a ghost." The sadness in her voice was so raw, so honest, that I felt it settle heavily inside my chest. And something inside me, something I shouldn't have let grow, tightened. She was lonely. She was hurting. And I was becoming the only person she trusted enough to collapse near. I didn't seek this connection. I didn't encourage it. But it was happening. Quietly. Inevitably. And as much as I tried to deny it, she was no longer just my son's wife moving through the house. She had become the presence I couldn't stop noticing, and the ache I couldn't push away. The weekend that changed everything didn't announce itself with thunder. It didn't arrive with a storm or a fight or anything loud enough to warn me. It slipped into the house quietly, like most dangerous things do. It was almost 10 o'clock on a Saturday night when I got home. I remember because I checked the clock on the wall the moment I walked in, surprised to see how late it had gotten. The house was dim, but not silent. The faint clatter of plates in the kitchen told me someone was awake. When I stepped inside, Sheila turned toward me from the stove, offering a small smile, gentle, tired, grateful. "You didn't eat yet, did you?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not since lunch." "Then sit," she said softly. "I'll warm something for you." I tried to protest, but the truth was, I didn't want to. I liked the feeling of being cared for. I liked seeing someone moving around the kitchen again, doing those small things my wife used to do, things I thought I would never feel again in this lifetime. While she reheated the food, I went to change clothes. When I returned, dinner was waiting on the small table, neat, warm, prepared with a kind of affection that felt almost out of place in a house full of unspoken sadness. We didn't talk much at first. I ate. She sat across from me, hands folded, quietly keeping me company. It should have felt ordinary. It didn't. After I finished, I stood to take my plate to the sink, but she stepped forward quickly. "I'll get it," she said softly. "You don't have to," I insisted. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." She reached for the plate, but instead of lowering her eyes to the sink, she paused. She stood there, just inches from me, the plate still in her hand, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher at first. Not sadness, not exhaustion, something deeper, heavier, almost pleading. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she set the plate down on the counter and turned toward me fully. "Sheila," I murmured, confused. Her eyes glistened, not with tears this time, but with something rawer, something that came from every night she had been left alone, every hour she waited for a man who did not return her love, every quiet ache she had swallowed until it overflowed. "I don't know what's happening to me anymore," she whispered. "I feel lost. I feel unwanted." The word unwanted hit me like a punch. No one should ever feel that way in their own marriage. I took a careful step backward, not because I feared her, but because I feared myself. I feared my own reaction. I feared what my heart might betray if I wasn't careful. "You're not unwanted," I said, my voice low, steady. "You're hurting, and you're tired. Anyone would be." Her breath trembled. "Not anyone, just me." I shook my head. "Your pain is real, Sheila." "I see it." She closed her eyes at that, like those words alone were enough to loosen something that had been choking her for months. And then she stepped closer, not in a way that violated any boundary, not in a way that sought anything physical. She simply came near me the way a drowning person moves toward the surface, instinctively, desperately, blindly reaching for the air they need. I felt her presence like a warm current, too close, too dangerous, but too human for me to pull away without hurting her. "Sheila," I whispered, "we have to be careful." She opened her eyes. "I'm not trying to cross any line. I need someone to see me, really see me. And lately, It feels like you're the only one who does." My chest tightened so painfully I had to steady my breath. Because she was right. I did see her. More than I should. More than I wanted to admit. We stood there in the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken truths, unshed tears, and the weight of two people who were never meant to be standing this close, emotionally or otherwise. Finally, I stepped aside, giving her space to breathe, to gather herself. She looked down, embarrassed, and wiped her hands on a dish towel. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to make things strange." "You didn't," I said gently. "You're going through something difficult. Anyone in your place would feel the same." "Would they?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sometimes I think I'm losing my mind being neglected this way. I wanted to tell her she wasn't crazy. I wanted to tell her she deserved a kind of love my son wasn't giving her. But those weren't words I had the right to speak. So instead I said, "You're stronger than you think." She looked up at me again. This time her gaze was calmer, steadier, but still full of something she wasn't ready to name. For the rest of the evening, we watched a movie together, quietly, carefully, each of us trying to pretend that nothing in the air had shifted. But we both felt it. The distance we had maintained, the invisible line we had sworn to respect, it had moved, not by choice, not by intention, but by the simple, fragile truth of two lonely souls caught in the same silence. And even then, I knew. After that night, nothing inside this house would ever feel the same. There are moments in life that arrive silently, no fanfare, no warning, and yet alter something fundamental inside us. The moment I almost crossed the line didn't come wrapped in temptation the way novels describe. It wasn't physical desire that pulled me toward danger. It was something far more subtle, far more human. Tenderness misplaced, loneliness meeting loneliness, two hearts cracked in the same place. It happened on a night that should have been ordinary. Sergio had left again, keys jingling, cologne sharp in the air, offering a careless, "I'll be back later," as if those words still held meaning. Sheila didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply watched him leave with the expression of someone who had reached the end of her emotional endurance. After he walked out, she went to the kitchen and quietly served me dinner. I thanked her, hoping she'd sense she didn't need to do that, but she insisted. Caring for someone, anyone, was her way of coping with the emptiness her marriage had become. When I finished, I stood to take my plate to the sink, but she stepped forward quickly. "I'll get it," she said, reaching for the dish. I let her take it. But instead of turning to the sink, she paused, hands trembling just enough for me to notice. Then she looked at me. Not the way a woman looks at a man she wants, but the way a drowning person looks at the shore. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. The question stunned me. "Of course not. It feels like everyone is slipping away from me," she murmured. "Him, my family, and now I'm scared you'll distance yourself too." Her voice cracked, and suddenly she wasn't a young woman anymore, not in that moment. She was just a tired soul trying to hold together the pieces of a life falling apart. Without thinking, I stepped closer. Not too close, but enough to show her she wasn't alone. "You haven't lost me," I said gently. "You just need someone to listen. I'm here." Her eyes softened in a way that made my heart ache. She set the plate down on the counter and for a moment simply stood there as though she didn't trust her own balance. "Thank you," she whispered. But the way she said it carried more weight than gratitude. It carried need. She moved toward me, slowly, hesitantly, as if fighting her own conscience with every step. I felt the air thicken between us, that fragile space that had been shrinking for weeks. "Sheila," I murmured, unsure of what I was warning her about, her or myself. She reached out, not boldly, not seductively, but with trembling fingers that lightly touched my forearm. The contact was soft, almost accidental, but it sent a shock through me, not of desire, but of fear. Fear of how vulnerable we both were. Her voice came small. "I'm tired of feeling invisible." I swallowed hard. "You're not invisible." She looked down, tears forming at the corner of her eyes. Then, taking a shaky breath, she lifted my hand, gently, almost reverently, as if seeking reassurance from someone she trusted more than she should. "Why does kindness feel dangerous?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, because in that moment, kindness was dangerous. When her fingers wrapped around mine, every alarm inside me went off. Not because her touch was inappropriate, but because of how natural it felt, how human, how heartbreakingly tender. She took a step closer. Her forehead rested softly against my chest. Not a kiss, not an invitation, just a collapse, quiet, desperate, seeking safety. I froze. "Sheila, we need to stop. This isn't right," I whispered, though my voice shook. She pulled back slightly, her eyes rising to meet mine. Eyes full of hurt, eyes full of exhaustion, eyes silently asking, "Why am I so alone?" And in that vulnerable gaze, something inside me wavered. For a fraction of a second, just a breath, just a heartbeat, I felt the gravitational pull of crossing a boundary I could never return from. Not because I wanted her, but because she trusted me, because she needed someone, because life had carved too many empty spaces inside both of us. But then I saw something behind her eyes, something she didn't intend to reveal. A flicker of guilt, of fear, of someone shamefully aware of the moment unfolding, and that was what broke the spell. I gently stepped back, letting her hand slip from mine like something fragile I was terrified to damage. Her breath trembled. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing." "It's okay," I said quickly. "You're hurting. You're overwhelmed. But we can't let this confusion guide us." She nodded, wiping her tears, embarrassed. "Please don't think badly of me." "I don't," I whispered. "But this, tonight, shows how much you're suffering. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." She looked away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And in that moment, I felt a guilt so profound it hollowed me out. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had wanted, even for a single heartbeat, to be what she needed. That was the moment I almost crossed the line, not with action, not with touch, but with the dangerous ache in my own heart. An ache I knew I would spend many nights trying to forget. The morning after that near-disastrous moment, I woke with a heaviness inside me that felt almost physical, like a stone lodged beneath my ribs. I hadn't slept more than a few hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sheila's face the night before. Her trembling hands, her fragile desperation. The way she had leaned toward me, not out of desire, but out of sheer emotional collapse. And the worst part, the part that kept me staring at the ceiling long after sunrise, was knowing how close I had come to failing not just myself, but my son. No line had been crossed, no boundary broken. But the possibility, that possibility alone haunted me. I got up early to avoid running into Sheila. The kitchen was empty, the house still quiet. I brewed coffee, hoping the warmth would calm the turmoil inside me. But it didn't. Nothing could have. I was staring at the steam rising from the mug when I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Good morning," she said. I didn't turn immediately. I needed a breath, a moment to gather myself. When I finally did, I saw her standing in the doorway, her hair pulled back, her expression painfully sincere. "I'm sorry," she whispered before I could even greet her. I took a slow breath. "Sheila." "No," she insisted gently, stepping closer but stopping at a respectful distance. "Please let me say this. She wrung her hands together, eyes lowered. The shame pouring from her was so raw, so genuine that it pierced something inside me. "I shouldn't have come that close to you last night," she said. "I wasn't myself. I felt so alone, and I made you carry a pain that wasn't yours to carry." Her voice broke on the last words. I shook my head. "You didn't do anything with bad intentions." She looked up then, her eyes shimmering with tears she was trying hard not to let fall. "But I made you uncomfortable, and I put you in a terrible position. You're my husband's father. You've always been nothing but good to me, and I—" Her voice cracked again, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Seeing her cry like that, crying not out of loneliness now, but out of guilt, twisted a knife inside me. Gently I said, "Sheila, there's nothing to forgive. You were overwhelmed. Anyone can lose themselves in a moment of pain." She wiped her cheeks quickly, frustrated with her own fragility. "I don't want you to think I'm that kind of woman," she whispered. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I just—" She swallowed. "I've never felt this abandoned in my life." Her confession hit me harder than anything else. Because it wasn't about attraction. It wasn't about crossing boundaries. It was about despair. And despair makes people reach for the nearest piece of solid ground. "I know," I said softly. "I know you're not that kind of woman." She nodded, but the sadness didn't leave her face. Then she did something that broke me a little. She pleaded. "Please don't tell Sergio. Not about last night, not about any of this." I felt the ache in her voice. Not fear of being caught, fear of being blamed, fear of having even her pain used against her. "I won't say anything," I reassured her. "You have my word." The relief that washed over her shoulders was almost painful to witness. She let out a slow breath, wiped her face again, and managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not judging me." I didn't answer, because if I had spoken honestly in that moment, I would have had to confess something I couldn't bear to admit, that despite nothing having happened between us, I was the one carrying guilt. Deep, heavy guilt, so strong it made me avoid her gaze. Because I knew the truth. I knew what she didn't. The reason I felt so guilty wasn't because she had crossed a line. It was because I almost had. Not physically, but emotionally. My heart had hesitated in a place it never should have gone. That was the part I couldn't tell her. The part I couldn't tell anyone. The rest of the day passed in a strange silence. We spoke politely, carefully, like two people tiptoeing around the memory of a near accident. She kept more distance, and I did the same. Not out of discomfort with her, out of fear of myself, but even as she apologized, even as she begged me to forget, the truth was that nothing had been healed. Not inside her, not inside me, and certainly not inside the home where 3 people lived, but only 2 were suffering. That night, I lay in bed, unable to quiet my thoughts. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering how long we could continue living under the same roof without breaking something that could never be repaired. Her apology was sincere. Her guilt was real. But apologies don't erase emotions. They don't undo moments. They don't quiet feelings once awakened. And when she said, "Please don't tell him," the question I didn't dare ask was the one that echoed in my mind long after she'd gone to bed. If nothing truly happened, why did it feel like something had? Some secrets are heavy, not because they hide sins, but because they hide truths. And the truth I was now carrying burned inside me like an ember I couldn't put out. Nothing had happened between Sheila and me. No line had been crossed. No betrayal had taken place. Yet every time I saw her, every time I replayed the moment when she leaned into me, seeking comfort I shouldn't have been the one to give, I felt that ember glow hotter. It was the weight of what almost happened. The weight of what I felt, however briefly, and what I could never admit. And the worst part was this: I had no one to tell, no one to confide in, no one who could help me untangle the mess expanding inside my chest. So I carried it alone. Over the next few days, the house began to feel different, not visibly, not in any way Sheila or my son could point to. But for me, the atmosphere had shifted, subtle, tense, fragile. Like the walls themselves remembered what we were both trying desperately to forget. Sheila avoided staying in the same room with me for too long. She kept conversations short, polite. The softness in her voice remained, but she held herself carefully, like someone who had stepped too close to a cliff and now feared going near the edge again. I appreciated her distance and hated it. Both truths lived inside me simultaneously, pulling in opposite directions. What I hated more was the secret, the knowledge of that moment, and how it changed the way I looked at my son. When he returned home after another night out, he simply tossed his keys on the table, walked past both of us, and went straight to the bedroom without so much as a kiss for his wife. Sheila flinched. She didn't say a word, but the hurt in her eyes was so sharp I felt it like a blow. It was in moments like those that the secret ignited inside me, scorching deeper, because part of me, an ugly human part I wished I didn't have, wanted to shake him and shout, "Do you even see what you have? Do you realize the pain you're causing? Do you understand what your neglect is doing to her and to me?" But I said nothing. I couldn't say anything. I wasn't innocent enough to speak with authority anymore. Not after nearly crossing a line I had sworn my whole life never to cross. Even standing near him felt wrong, like I was holding something poisonous behind my back. The next evening, I found Sheila in the backyard, hanging laundry. The sun was low, painting the sky with those soft orange tones that always reminded me of endings. She didn't hear me at first, and for a moment, I simply watched her, quiet, gentle, moving with that heavy grace of someone who had grown used to surviving disappointment. She turned when she sensed me behind her. "Oh, sorry," she said, startled. "I thought you were him." "No," I answered. "It's just me." Something flickered in her eyes, relief maybe, or embarrassment, or both. We stood there for a moment, neither speaking. The silence felt like a living thing between us. Finally, she said, "I want you to know, I'm trying to forget that night, truly. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." "I don't," I lied. She nodded, though she could tell I wasn't being entirely truthful. "I've been thinking," she added quietly, folding a shirt. "Maybe I should go stay with my sister for a while, just to clear my head." The thought of her leaving sent a strange pang through me, a mixture of relief and something else, something I refused to examine. "You don't have to leave," I said. "This is your home." She gave a soft, sad smile. "It's supposed to be, but I don't feel like it is anymore." Her words cut deeper than she knew. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that she wasn't invisible, that someone in this house saw her pain with painful clarity. But I bit those words back. They were dangerous. Too dangerous. "Whatever you choose," I said finally, "I'll support you." She nodded, looking down at the laundry basket. "Thank you." But as she reached for another shirt, she hesitated. Her hands trembled faintly. Her voice, when she spoke again, was barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wish life had given you a different path?" The question lodged itself in my throat. I could have answered quickly, casually, dismissively, but the truth was heavy, and in that moment, too honest to face. So I simply said, "Sometimes." She looked at me then, not with longing, not with desire, but with recognition. Two people burdened by secrets, regrets, and unspoken truths. And that look fed the fire burning inside me. Not because it was romantic, not because it was forbidden, but because it confirmed what neither of us dared speak aloud. We were no longer just two people living in the same house. We were two people bound by a moment we could never fully undo. And as I walked back inside, I realized something terrifying. This secret wasn't going to fade. It wasn't going to soften. It wasn't going to disappear with time. It was going to stay. A quiet flame, hidden in the shadows of the house, burning everything from the inside out. There comes a point in every quiet disaster where you realize the situation won't collapse with noise, but with silence. A silence so heavy, so suffocating, that it becomes impossible to breathe inside it. That was the place I had reached. The place we had reached. The secret between Sheila and me, unspoken, unintended, but real, had grown roots in the house. It lived between the walls. It followed us from room to room. It turned every small interaction into something loaded, delicate, fragile. Every time she spoke to me softly, I felt guilt tighten its grip around my throat. Every time my son ignored her or returned home at dawn, something inside me twisted with anger I had no right to feel. It was wrong, all of it. A moral imbalance I could no longer justify with silence. And one night, the weight became too much to bear. It was late, past midnight, when I found Sheila awake in the living room. She sat curled up on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders, staring at the dark television screen as though waiting for her own reflection to speak to her. She turned when she heard me, offering a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "You?" She shook her head. "It's been weeks since I slept properly." There was no accusation in her voice, but guilt still washed over me. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to leave or sit down. Eventually, I chose the armchair across from her, putting as much distance as I could between us. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I hate feeling like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm walking on glass in my own home. Like I'm one wrong breath away from breaking something I don't even understand." Her honesty hit me hard, too hard. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Sheila, we need to talk about what happened." She froze. Fear flickered in her eyes, not fear of me, but fear of facing the truth. "I know," she whispered, "but I've been avoiding it." "We can't avoid it anymore." Her breath trembled. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as though bracing for impact. "I need to say this first," I continued, my voice rough. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were hurting. You reached out to the nearest steady thing you could find. Anyone in your place might have done the same." She bowed her head, ashamed. "But I shouldn't have put you in that position. You're his father. I crossed a line, even if nothing happened." "No," I said firmly. "We both were too close to that line. And that's exactly why things need to change." She looked up, alarmed. "Change how?" I took a long breath. The words felt like they were made of stone. "I think you should go stay with your sister for a while." The pain on her face was instant, sharp, like I had struck her. "You want me to leave?" she whispered, voice cracking. "I don't want you to leave," I said quickly. "But I think it's the only way to protect all of us. You, me, even my son." She stared at me, tears rising. "Protect us from what?" I looked away, ashamed. From ourselves, from misunderstandings, from emotions none of us ever intended to feel. Her lips trembled. "So you're saying we can't be in the same house anymore?" "I'm saying we shouldn't." I forced myself to continue, even as it tore something inside me. "We crossed into dangerous territory once. We can't risk doing it again. You deserve clarity, space, peace, and staying here. It's hurting you." She covered her mouth, a quiet sob escaping through her fingers. "I'm not asking you to choose me," I added softly. I'm asking you to choose yourself for once." She cried silently for a long time, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone who finally accepted a truth they had been resisting. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I didn't want to lose this place," she whispered. "It was the closest thing I had to a family." "You're not losing us," I said, my own voice unsteady. "But we need distance to heal, to think, to keep from hurting each other even more." She nodded slowly, brokenly. "I understand." We sat there in grief, two people mourning something that had never been allowed to exist, yet had to die anyway. After a while, she stood. I rose too, instinctively, but she lifted her hand gently. "Please," she whispered, "don't come closer. If you do, I won't be able to go." Her words shattered me. She took a shaky breath. "I'll pack tomorrow. I'll go for a few weeks, maybe longer." I swallowed, unable to speak. Before she left the room, she paused and looked back at me, eyes full of gratitude, sorrow, and something else neither of us dared name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when no one else did." Then she walked away, and I let her. Because loving with integrity sometimes means stepping back, not stepping closer. That night, I lay alone in the dark, knowing I had made the only decision that could protect us all, and knowing it was also the decision that would hurt the most. If this story moved you, don't leave without supporting the channel. Like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the powerful stories we bring every week. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in their place? Your engagement helps this community grow and keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching.